One of the problems we face in dealing with the phenomenon of peak oil and trying to cope with the future of industrial society is that people think of it as a technical problem. It's not. The technical aspects could have been solved a long time ago. It's a cultural problem, it's a mental problem, and a problem woven into the stories that we tell and that we use to define the world of our experience. That's where the core of the problem lies, and those are the things that need to be understood and changed, I think, if we're going to achieve anything constructive out of the twilight of the age of cheap, abundant energy.
This is Peak Moment. We are living at a peak of human innovation, information, wealth, and health. But we're also at a peak of population and consumption, with rising temperatures and declining resources fueled by cheap oil and gas. Peak Moment Television, bringing you examples of positive responses to energy decline and climate change through local community action.
Hi, welcome to Peak Moment. I'm Janaea Donaldson. I'm in Sacramento at a conference of the Association for the Study of Peak Oil, and I'm real lucky because I got to touch in with John Michael Greer, the author of a new book called The Long Descent. Thanks for joining me.
I'm glad to be here.
Well, I want to know, what do you mean by the long descent?
Well, basically, there's a presupposition in our culture that progress is the basic law of existence.
Sure.
And that progress basically continues indefinitely unless some kind of catastrophe overwhelms it. All of our views of the future are based on this idea that either we continue on this imaginary path we've traced from the caves to the stars, or we crash and burn. What I'm arguing instead is that history has a much more cyclical flow to it. Civilizations rise and fall, and it's not a fast process.
But wait a minute, aren't we in circumstances? And let's back up.
Let's back up.
What led you to create the book at all, actually?
Well, I've been interested in energy issues actually since my teen years. My 8th grade social studies teacher had a copy of an Isaac Asimov essay titled "The Nightmare World Without Oil."
Oh my goodness!
In the mid 70s.
Oh wow! Okay.
I read that and went, "Whoa! I'm going to be alive when this happens." And
That's
being
right.
the bookworm that I was in those days, I went down to the public library, got a copy of The Limits to Growth, proceeded to read a lot of that literature.
In the 1970s.
In the 1970s.
You were right on it, at the time it came out.
I was on it. Unlike many people, I kept studying it during the 80s when that became very unpopular.
Yes.
You know, Morning in America, we can now ignore ecological reality and keep on with what Jim Kunstler calls the paradise of happy motoring. and so gradually, I realized when the peak oil movement really got started again in the late 1990s, and I was in one of the earliest peak oil email groups running on empty at that time, and I realized very quickly that all of the discussion focused around these two notions of the future: either complete overnight collapse, or we'll get past this. They'll come up with something, and we'll go zooming off toward a Star Trek
And
future.
I want to address that because when I first got aware of the peak oil movement, much later than you did, it was '05, and I went online. Those were exactly the stories. It's like immediate die-off, crash and burn. We're not going to survive this. You know. Good
Exactly.
Lord. Or some version of the silver bullet. They will figure their way.
Here's a techno fix, and we'll get back on track.
The ethanol or biogas or whatever it is. And I thought, well, I'd like to believe that. The other was so horrible, onerous that I thought I don't want to pay attention to that. But you're giving us the notion that that's just following some standard myths in our culture.
Well, basically, one of the standard myths in our culture is that we don't have any myths. You know, myths are what primitive people believe.
Okay.
Of course we have myths. Human beings think with narratives. We think with stories as inevitably as we talk with mouths or walk with feet. Okay? Stories are among the most basic of human tools. They're the tools we use to understand the world. The problem we face nowadays is that we tend to mistake our stories for reality. And the stories that we have are usually old religious myths with the serial numbers filed off and dressed up in some kind of secular drag.
Like, give me an example.
Here's an example, the crash and burn story.
Okay.
What the crash and burn story normally amounts to the claim that the world is in this horribly evil state, and very soon it will be completely destroyed destroyed, and everything that whoever is telling the story hates about the world will be wiped off the face of the earth, and then a small remnant of people, including almost always the person who's talking,
yes.
will be among the virtuous survivors who go ahead and establish the society that they want.
In a sense, the kingdom
Exactly.
of paradise
Exactly.
here.
We have the tribulation, we have the second coming, we have the millennium of the elect. It's all out of the book of Revelations.
All right. All right.
Now, the myth of progress is actually also extracted from the book of Revelations. The idea is there that the second coming already happened with Galileo and Isaac Newton playing the role of Jesus. So the tribulation was all those centuries before we had science, when everything was so terribly, horribly grim. And now we are in the millennial kingdom, and it's just going to get better and better forever.
Well,
until we're raptured up into space.
Well, I would say that we've really lived out, or tried to live out that myth, at least since the 50s, right?
Absolutely.
Material progress and higher standards of living and all kinds of things.
And the tragedy is that we have been supporting that on non-renewable, irreplaceable resources, which are now coming into short supply.
So that's what that says is that so long as you've got cheap energy, you can dream that, with a few improvements to the system here and there, we can come to paradise.
Exactly.
But when you run out of cheap energy, which is where we're staring in the face, what happens then?
The end of the age of cheap energy is the end of progress. We think that progress is because we're just so smart. Progress is because we've had a fantastic amount of cheap, abundant energy that we have burned through with fantastic extravagance. This is the photosynthesis of 500 million years stored inside the earth. And we've gone through it in what? Less than 300 years.
Yeah.
We've wasted most of it.
We burned most of it instead of turning into magical, wonderful things.
Exactly, we burned it. And so what I am suggesting is that while this is different in scale and different in detail from what has happened to previous civilizations, other civilizations have also exhausted their resource base. People are desperately trying to pretend that having won the lottery once, the appropriate thing to do is take the last of our money and buy more lottery tickets so we can win the lottery again and have even more money to throw around.
So we've had this cheap oil
lottery
bonanza.
We have had the ultimate lottery bonanza. We have the ultimate lottery win, and we have squandered it. Okay? Trying to, biofuels, there's a lot of potential there. Renewable energy, a lot of potential there. It only adds up to a small fraction of the energy we get from fossil fuels. Petroleum in particular is the most concentrated, the most convenient, the most flexible, the most abundant energy resource in the solar system. There's nothing else like it, as far as we know, anywhere, because it requires a living biosphere to concentrate that kind of energy. Yeah.
And they are. You don't have to find one of those on every planet.
As far as we know. So Jupiter may be crawling with things, but they haven't. They're not interested in talking to us. I think they probably watched My Mother's Car reruns at one point and said, redline that planet, boys.
So if we have a predicament.
We have a predicament.
Then what do we do?
We deal with it.
All right.
Okay.
Like how?
Our problem could be compared to finding out that tomorrow morning, at some comfortable point, we will be taken up to 10,000 feet in an airplane and pushed out the door. Okay. Now, stated that way, that sounds pretty awful. There are preparations that could be made to simplify that process and make it a lot easier to undergo. The problem with being pushed out of an airplane door at 10,000 feet is not that you fall, it's that you fall too fast and land hard.
Okay.
And
all right.
if the only solution you're willing to accept is finding some way to stay at 10,000 feet, you will not think of the obvious solution, which is a parachute. We need parachutes. Industrial society is going to give way to the deindustrial world of the future. We can't change that now. What we can change is, and what we can affect at this point, is how we make that decline.
Okay.
Our best opportunities are in the past. We could have, if we followed through the extraordinary gains of the 1970s, we'd be fine now.
When we all reduced our energy, and we stayed on Carter's plan and so on to
if we'd gone in and really made a push for renewables and for efficiency, for recycling, we'd be well on our way to long-term sustainability, and we'd be basically fine. We didn't. We flushed that chance. Now, at this point, there's going to be crisis. There are going to be troubles. The recent turmoil in the economy isn't directly caused by energy difficulties, but there may be some linkages there. Certainly, the buildup of preposterous amounts of debt was in some ways a way to pay an energy bill that America had no other way to pay.
Well, I also see that we wanted to believe in the 80s when Reagan took the solar panels off the White House. We wanted to believe that we could ignore those messages, and so we have tried to keep that same standard of living, but without the base for it.
Yeah,
you know, because
exactly.
energy is more expensive, and so we've used debt.
So we used debt. We've used debt, and now that particular house of cards is coming apart in a very big way. Will they be able to patch things together? I'm sure they will. Money is a game. It's not actually goods and services, much less energy. Okay. But there's going to be some serious costs.
So I want to turn to, because I think most of our viewers are going to be concerned about. Okay, if we buy, go on with your credit. What kinds of things are we going to see happening, and how can I prepare? And what do we do in this predicament?
What do we do?
And I love the notion. I just want to add that if all you are used to are the kinds of approaches that say, how do I keep it 10,000 feet, which means put more fuel in that airplane, etc. The blinders are on that you may not think about. Well, wait a minute, we have a different objective here, different goal.
The situation is insoluble if put in terms of how do we find something else to pour into our gas tanks. What we all need to do, especially in the United States and in a handful of other countries that waste energy at the same rate, is drastically curtail our energy use. I'm not talking about driving a little less and turning down the thermometer 3 degrees. It is worth remembering that the average European uses 1/3 the energy per year as the average American.
We're about the same lifestyle.
Actually, rather a better one.
They have community.
They have community.
They talk to each other. They walk. They're healthy.
They also have much better healthcare systems and a range of other benefits that we don't get in this country. That shows the sheer scale of waste inherent in the American economy. The best thing that we could do, if people actually wanted to drop the price of energy, the most effective way is to use much less. Yes. And we can do that if we're willing to make the necessary lifestyle choices. Those will be perceived as sacrifices. It involves fewer opportunities, less waste. Waste is fun. We all like to,
sure.
burn up the gas, burn up the miles.
Get impulsive, go drive. Yes,
exactly.
We understand.
Yeah, take a walk instead. There are some problems that we face because our entire infrastructure is built around automobiles.
Yeah.
Most people you have suburbs. We have a ghettoizing process where we've got our suburbs many miles from our workplaces, many miles from where we shop, and it's designed around the convenience of cars rather than people. That will change.
But can we really afford to go tear all those buildings down and put them back together?
It won't be done by tearing buildings down. It'll be done by jury rigging and by one thing that people can do is push their local zoning boards to allow businesses in residential neighborhoods.
Sure.
Small businesses especially. That's where most jobs come from anyway. So generally there's going to be a lot of relocalization is very common. Term in the peak oil community is very important. We will no longer, already with the price of fuel soaring, it's becoming economically very challenging to have all of our manufacturing done in third world countries at sweatshop prices and ship halfway across the world here. That's got to go away. That means a lot of people are going to have the potential for jobs in actually productive industries and careers, rather than pushing paper around or the kind of administrative tasks that we use.
More physical world things.
Honestly, if I were a young man at this point, if I were a teenager, I'd be looking for a position in agriculture, or in one of the crafts, one of the skilled trades.
I think, and my hope is that young people start to think about that soon.
Absolutely.
Because the wisdom of the folks that still have those crafts knowledge, some of which has just been barely kept alive, is going to need to be carried on.
It's got to be carried on. Fortunately, we've got the development of organic agriculture at this point is a major positive thing. Right now, the organic agriculture being practiced in all over the world at this point, increasingly, is a quantum leap beyond most agricultural systems. It's drawn on the best of some of the very sustainable Asian traditions and the best of Western science and a range of other factors. It's a brilliant creation, and it has I think it may actually go down in history as the 20th century's greatest contribution to human history.
Wow.
We actually have a system of agriculture that improves soil fertility over time rather than decreasing it. And that is so revolutionary compared to what's going on in most American farms today.
Well, sure. Industrial farms that are depleting the soil and using fertilizers and nitrogen and so on. It's crazy.
And it's a short-term thing. In the area where I live in Southern Oregon, a lot of commercial farms are changing over to organic because it is that much cheaper. Petrochemicals cost. When oil's, what is it today, $106 a barrel? That works out into increased costs of fertilizer, pesticides, herbicides, you name it.
Tractors, water pumping,
exactly.
all of it.
As you go toward a labor-intensive, less energy-intensive organic agriculture, first of all, you employ more people, but you also sharply decrease your energy costs. And so, on a business level, it's actually more effective. Many of the things that we will see happening will win not because there's some kind of ideological strength to them, but because they're actually more economical. Insulating your house, storm windows. These things save a lot of money. We forgot that during the quarter century from 1980 to 2005, when energy was literally cheaper than it has ever been in human history. We thought of that as normal at the time. It seemed so ordinary, but it wasn't. It was a bizarre, almost a hallucinatory time, and now it's over.
And I think people are starting to just get an inkling of that.
It's seeping out there. It's seeping. It takes a while for the collective imagination to absorb something, especially when it's something so opposed to the narratives, to the stories that we like to hear.
And so is there another, or is it too soon to find out? Is there another story, another myth that may be more in line with where we're headed? We may only have pieces of it.
I think one will come together. There are various stories. Cultural narratives are always negotiated among competing pressures. They come into being slowly. We are to some extent in a time where our old stories don't work, and we don't really have new ones yet.
Yes.
And that's a challenging time, but it's also can be a very valuable time, because in the gap between stories, it's possible to look at. It's easier, I should say, to look at our own powers of story making, and say, okay, instead of allowing one story to dominate how I look at the world, what if we step back a little bit and look at how we make stories and how we construct the world in our minds?
I feel like folks that are aware of peak oil are talking among themselves, trying to, groping. We are groping to find what are the stories that can help inform us about how do we move forward, how do we help our communities. That's one of them. One of the new pieces of the myth is definitely going to have to be, well, we can't live our isolated little separatist box anymore. So there's some togetherness that happens with this story. I find myself remembering the story from the Old Testament of Joseph in Egypt with the dreams the Pharaoh had that said, we're going to have 7 years of plenty, and then we're going to have 7 years of famine. Be prepared. And I find myself pulling that story out to say, okay, it's time to do the be prepared time before before the energy runs out.
Very much so. One of the stories, one of the metaphors that I find very useful in this is to speak of the cycle of the seasons. We have acted as though we would go from summer to harvest, to a kind of uber harvest, to an uber harvest, with ever more food just pouring in fantastic plenty. We have forgotten that after autumn comes winter, and it's a really good idea to store some of that food for the winter, because there won't be much.
I think there are a lot of people in eastern United States and elsewhere in the world who are putting in their wood, knowing that that's true. They're
starting to look at winter once again with, it's no longer a minor inconvenience. I was talking to one of the other people here at the conference who is from New England, and who say, you have to understand, in New England, heat is not heat in the winter is not a function of being comfortable. It's not a matter of put on another sweater. It's a matter of, do you freeze to death? And that's something that has to be relearned, because during the years when you could just throw cheap energy at it, it was just an inconvenience. That's not true anymore. The Southwest is in the same boat with heat and with water.
Right, and water.
And water, very much water.
So, John Michael, in our last 5 minutes,
okay,
what precious gems have we've covered, haven't we covered that's close to your heart?
One of the things about the age of cheap energy is that it's made us think that it's made us ignore our own capacities, our own potentials as human beings, and encouraged us to focus instead on what we can make machines do. And on the one hand, that leads to ignoring a lot of our potential as human beings, but it also leads to a very specific kind of thinking in terms of power relationships. You don't have a conversation with your car or with your alarm clock. You tell it what to do. And when it doesn't do exactly what you do, you get grumpy and you take it to the repairman and you throw it or buy a new one. You don't converse with it, you don't live with it, you don't
work things out.
Yeah, there's no negotiation, there's no sharing, there's no community.
Right, that's true.
So it's encouraged a very mechanistic attitude that we apply to ourselves, we apply to each other, we apply to the living earth that supports all of our lives. And it's not been, it's had some very negative consequences. One of the things that we need to reacquaint ourselves with is the fact that our own capacity, human beings have enormous capacities that we've left unused for 300 years. And we need to reacquaint ourselves with our own capacities, with our own innate human abilities to do a whole range of things. We are actually, we're a very successful life form. We've got a lot of capacities that we've evolved down through millions of years, and we need to put those to work rather than just running to a machine. And on the one hand, that's all we've got left now is ourselves. On the other hand, I'm not sure we actually need that much more than ourselves and each other. And of course, the natural world that supports our lives.
Which we will want to take care of to be part of that family that we,
if we don't take, people think of nature as an amenity, as something cute in a pot. Next time you take a breath, thank the tree that produced that oxygen. Our lives are totally dependent on nature. And that's the delusion that we can be separate from nature is, I think, one of the great blind spots of the modern world.
And I think that's going to be one of those turning myths, is that it's going to be, of course we're all woven into this web together. Of course we're
part of the web of nature, yeah, well, I hope so.
And yes, we can be in conversation, because when you talk about our human capacities, I think about things like intuition, like our ability to feel, which is not given much support in this culture, in a mechanized culture in particular. Whether it's empathy or sensitivities that we just shut down.
Yeah.
And that ability to care that I think will go a long ways towards our survival for this time.
All of this is important.
What gives you hope?
We've been here before. Civilizations rise and fall all the time. The fact that civilizations fall is one of the most certain things about them. Ours has had a wild ride. Okay, it is nearing the downward cycle of its lifespan, and that's okay. All of us die too. That doesn't make life worthless. Our civilization has accomplished some wonderful things as well as some awful things.
That's certainly true.
And so, what gives me hope is the fact that we've been here before. It's not a new experience. It has some new features, but it always does. Every life is different. And so, the way down, the long descent may be a rough road for many people. It will inevitably be a rough road for many people. But, it will bottom out and new civilizations will arise.
I love your notion. that it isn't just about this individual life. Life will go on.
Life will go on.
Human life will go
Exactly.
on. It will have different flavor. Our followers they'll look at it and say, my God, they wasted a hell of a lot. They did a lot of amazing things.
Yeah.
They'll have stories to tell.
They'll be telling stories about us for thousands of years. The time that people flew to the moon. Okay, there's a lot of material for myth there, but I hope they also learn from our mistakes.
Yes.
Because we've made some howlers, and but that happens.
This has been a wonderful conversation.
Well, thank you.
I really thank you for
Thank
this, and I hope that The Long Descent is as interesting as you describe in your book. I think it's really fascinating.
I did my best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're watching Peak Moment. My guest is John Michael Greer, the author of The Long Descent. I'm Janaea Donaldson. If you value these programs, join us at peakmoment.tv and contribute. Thanks.